the whole idea of insecurity is insecure attachment. Like, we often think insecurity is how we think about ourselves, but insecurity is really all about, do I feel safe with you, with another person? Do I need to become something else more than what I am in order to matter to you?
Yeah. You ready?
Let's do it.
You look ready.
I feel ready.
You look good.
Thanks, you do too.
I feel like, when's the last time we saw each other?
Yesterday.
Oh yeah.
At the gym. Now,
like,
in street clothes, it's been a little, we definitely don't see each other in this attire very often.
You look different than in your gym shorts.
Right. Well, because I have my hair back and my headband on.
That's right.
It's like a whole different
So
version of myself.
it's been like 16 hours.
Yeah, at least.
Yeah, yeah.
And not to mention the text thread, lots of ongoing dialogue.
That's right.
And nonsense.
So, gang, if you haven't figured out, this is a friend. This is Shad Berry. Shad and I have known each other for some years, many years, I think we could say, and
at least 10.
Somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 years. And we train together, we work out together, we've been on ski trips together, we've been to the beach together. We are very good friends. And
saunas, cold plunges.
Oh yes, we've done many saunas together, sauna sessions and ice baths and cold plunges.
Vestless Murphs and Murphless vests.
Yes, and Murph with the vest.
And Murph with the vest.
Yeah. If you've read my book Beat Cancer Daily or The Blue Zones, Shad is part of my Moai. And the Moai is like your close circle, right? Your close circle of friends that you really have deep relationships with, that you enjoy spending time with, that you know, energize you and give you, you know, fulfillment and joy and satisfaction and, you know, just healthy relationships. And so Shad founded a company called Cardia Counseling, and we're actually going to talk about talking, about talk therapy, about counseling, because it's so critical. Not just to be able to talk about your problems and to get good advice in life, but if you have cancer or if you're struggling with a chronic disease, a big part of this, as many of you know, because I talk about it all the time, is you have to really be honest about who you are, about your relationships, about your past, about anger and bitterness and resentment. You got to get serious about forgiveness, and you know, sometimes we just need some help. Like, we need to be able to talk to somebody and help them, let them help us talk through our emotions, right? Our baggage, so we can release it. So anyway, I'm really excited. I've known Shad, like I said, a long time. He is an expert in this realm, and so I'm excited to kind of dig into it. So Shad.
Yeah.
We're in Shad's office. These are not my chairs.
This is not my stuff.
These are not my books.
I asked you to bring books, but we were going to showcase these aren't my books either, but they are a row of books we use.
They're just filler.
Yep, that's right. Good background stuff. Wanted to create the proper environment for this conversation. Well, I'm thrilled to be here with you, and likewise, one of the things, if my wife Veronica has asked me over the last couple of years, where do I feel most like myself? And my answer was consistently within our group, within the Iron Tribe community that we work out together with. And one of the things that you're alluding to, what was the word, moai?
Yeah.
I need to know more about this. I can't believe
it's a Japanese word.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. So, so one of the things that I use to describe moai is the people that want more for you than they need from you. And so this idea of being in relationships that you don't have to work or exhaust yourself out, burn yourself out in order to maintain or be in. And so our relationship has been an incredible source of life, and have many fond memories of the way that you've spoken into my life, been an encouragement to me and family members. Family members who are battling cancer have had success in that realm that you've been a huge encouragement to. So we've got lots of things to talk about. So I'm really excited.
Yeah, lots of things in common.
Yep.
So why don't we start with your personal journey, because I know it. Yeah, I know some of the backstory, but I'd love for you to share it with the audience, how you ended up in this field, because this came out of your personal experience and difficulty you had in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say by the time I was 26, 27, I was married. I had 4 kids. I was working in our family business. I had risen to the level of a vice president. Big fish, smaller pond. It was a small family business.
But a big family.
But a big family, yeah. The youngest of 8. So I had 4 older brothers that were in the business and my dad. And I was very driven, very motivated, very ambitious, but largely I was driven by not wanting to be the run of the litter. As the youngest of 8, I really idolized my older brothers. They looked like what epitomized godly men who were providing for their families and successful in the marketplace, and they're good men. But I had really gotten into a rut where I was neglecting every other aspect. That may be over dramatization of it, but I was neglecting a lot of my life. My wife, if she were here, would say she was lonely. You know, I was doing the work thing, she was doing the home thing. I was missing out a lot on life with my younger kids at that point, not really knowing it. And so one of the questions we were asking at the time was, can I become who God made me to be? And this just kind of was impressed in our heart and stay in this, on this path, not just in the work, but just living life this way. And my wife was very patient and never pushing or nagging, but just praying that God would give us some clarity around it. And that was the thought of even leaving the family business, even considering leaving the business, felt like betrayal. It felt like I was doing something horribly wrong. So I never even uttered the thought that was on my radar. At the same time, as it pertains to mental health, the thought of going to counseling never crossed my mind. That was something that I had categorized was something, and I'll be general, but like something that weaker people needed, or people that had made bad decisions, or people that had battled addiction. So I was very kind of what I'd describe as pharisaical, very judgmental, and kind of just really viewed myself as that was something that I didn't need or even would have considered.
People with major marriage problems.
Yes, like if you went to counseling, it was because you were, and I've learned a lot of things that we'll maybe touch on. So fast forward, I would say I was wrestling with that for 3 or 4 years, and a few things happened, specifically during like an 18-month period. As I began the process of leaving the family business and beginning to realize that I was feeling the strong urge to move outside of that context, we had gotten pregnant with our 5th. My wife had a miscarriage. It was a very difficult miscarriage. She had had hard pregnancies, but she had a uterine infection, and the doctor was like, man, we probably don't need to reproduce biologically anymore. So that opened our hearts to adoption, which is a whole nother side story of how we had gotten exposed to that, and my travels to Africa and some other mentors of mine that had done that. And we had a birth mom that had chosen our family, and maybe a year or so after that, after we had started that adoption process, we were selected. She was due in a month, so she wanted us at the hospital with her, and we went to the hospital. We're there with the delivery. And I remember being so afraid that I would feel differently about my adopted son than I did about my biological children, and that was part of my prayer to God. I was like, I didn't want to feel any different. I wanted this to be my son. And I remember holding him for the first time, just like bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh kind of moment. And we left the hospital 4 days later, and in the state of Tennessee, the birth mom has 10 days to revoke her right of surrender. And then on the 9th day of having him home from the hospital, I saw the call on my phone from the adoption agency, and my heart immediately sank. And I just like, don't tell me what I think you're about to tell me. And they said, I'm so sorry. We didn't know. She on her own went down and revoked her surrender. And you can either give him back to us for interim care for 2 days, you can keep him for 2 days. And so we said we'd hold on to him. And the level of grief that was really what I would call I reference Ephesians 4:17 a lot, where Paul's telling the Ephesians to not become callous-hearted, but to remain tender-hearted. And I use an Iron Tribe example of us doing knees to bars and we tear calluses, right? And you know what it feels like to tear callus. If you touch it, there's nothing there. Like it's you know, you feel it, but it just feels like pressure.
Yeah.
That's not sensitive. But if you scratch the palm of your hand, there's sensitivity to it. And so I reference that moment as the calluses just being torn off my heart. And normally I could outwork, outthink, I could figure it out, you know. And this was something that no matter what angle or direction I turned, there was no solution that took away the pain.
So you were just raw, basically,
yeah.
raw flesh.
Yep. Yeah, and that's what it felt like. I mean, and I fell to my knees, curled up, cried, and didn't know what to do. And then, you know, subsequently went home, told my wife, our family. It was just this. It was a death, but nobody died. So it was, all of that was very strange. And so I would say that was what I have since looked back on and called that moment is the moment I joined the human race. Because up to that point, I was really trying to transcend humanity, be superhuman. And I didn't know it. And I still, you know, even then I didn't realize what was happening. The other real big revelation for me was when I realized, and a buddy reminded me of this. He said, "You remember your prayer?" I was like, "What prayer?" He's like, "That you would love him the same way that you loved your other children." And he said, "God answered that prayer. And that's why it hurt so much." I was like, wow. "Oh, that's terrible. That's like amazing." And I still get chills every time I say it, because what I realized is you can't live in this life and love and not take the risk of pain or like even guarantee pain.
Yeah. And
that was a complete like paradigm shift of how I had functioned and operated, where I kind of loved at an arm's length distance. Relationships were very utilitarian, you know, very transactional. And so that is what I call it. I said some people have the courage to walk into counseling voluntarily, and many of you, that may be many of your listeners. I did not, and I feel like I got shoved into it because I didn't know where else to go. And and my wife and I couldn't meet each other's needs because we were both kind of just and I wouldn't even told you I was depressed, because that's, you don't get depressed, but I was depressed. And so I remember calling Dr. Tim Holler, who is now my partner at Cardia. He was an elder at our church, and I knew he was a practicing clinician. And I said, "Man, something is horribly wrong with me. Like, I can't make," and I thought I was the only one. Like, that's the other tragedy of, you know, suffering in isolation, is you assume nobody else has experienced this before. Little did I know there was
nobody understands you.
Right.
Yeah.
So when I called Tim and I was like, you got to fix me. And I jokingly tell this story now. He says, "I've got an opening next Thursday." I'm like, "Do you hear me? Like, I'm dying over here." So he had good boundaries. But so I finally went and met with him, and was so afraid of going, like so scared to enter into that space. And he was kind and compassionate, and it's what's technically called a mismatching experience. It's the opposite of what I would expect. What I would have expected is, you need to toughen up. Like, you really, you know, this is not that big a deal. Do you know that there are people that have been through way worse? Like, that's what I had come to expect. And he was moved even to tears, like being with me empathetically, and I was like, this is so strange and it feels so good. And so we began a journey of meeting together routinely, which opened doors for me of other resources and just a whole nother universe that I didn't know existed of care. That there were people trained specifically in this field with tons of experience, and that they were able to be with someone, get in my boat, and actually show concern and care to help me heal. And I was blown away by that. And then that just began opening me up. And I was very attracted to it, very drawn to it. I wanted to be, a lot of things were happening internally. A lot of things I would say that were healing and awakening in the midst of that. So he started kind of surgically, although with a lot, you know, more care, of inviting more of my story into the room that I had minimized or not talked about or didn't even know were affecting me. So it's been a wild journey, which made me angry and passionate for other people to experience the same thing.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, you know, the way you described yourself is the way I would describe myself before I had cancer, which is I was very driven, you know, sort of had a tough persona, like nothing bothers me, like I was trying to be superhuman. But on the inside, I was very insecure, judgmental, critical, didn't like myself. I had something to prove, you know, I was very jealous and envious of others. I couldn't be happy for anyone else's success because, you know, I just was riddled with jealousy. And all that's connected, right?
Yep.
Insecurity, jealousy, and pride. So I was also very prideful and arrogant and conceited. So like all of these swirling negative...
We were great friends.
Yeah.
Great to be around.
Yeah. Great guy.
Right.
I was a super great guy. You didn't know me then, fortunately. But, and very selfish too. Like, you know, all the sort of like unlikable qualities. I did have a good sense of humor. I think that's the only reason anybody would put up with all my other bad qualities.
Salvaged it.
But anyway, so, you know, you had a breaking point. You had this, like, you know,
tipping
point.
Yeah, the word I use that I borrowed from C.S. Lewis is severe mercy. Because it was merciful because it woke me up.
Yeah.
But it was severe because it was painful. And I really do believe we come to the ends of ourselves in some way, shape, or form. And it is a merciful thing when we do that. And it generally hurts, and it can often lead to either transformation because I embrace my humanity, or it leads to me calcifying, petrifying, becoming more fragile, more disgruntled, more envious. And I've seen it, you know, go both ways, and I can't even take any credit for it. It's such a gift. Because I got surrounded by, it's like when I started telling the truth about how needy I was, how scared I was, how lonely I was, I thought people would look at me and be like, you're messed up. Like we are not hanging out again.
Yeah.
And what ended up happening, just like even, you know, what we've experienced is like, oh yeah, me too. I've got my version of that. We often say when you tell one man's story, you tell every man's story. It's like, it's a different story, but same experience, same internal, you know, process. So we're not alone, even though we feel like it at times.
I felt very alone because I didn't, you know, I was navigating cancer holistically, so I felt like no one would understand what I was trying to do. And plus, I was slowly discovering all of my flaws, you know, or not even discovering, but maybe just admitting to myself my flaws, my faults, my fears, my failures, like, and like letting it all, sort of putting it all out on the table. And being
coming
honest
out of hiding.
about it. Yeah, just being honest about who am I? You know, because it's so easy when you have a lot of things about yourself you don't like or things about your life you don't like. It's so easy to just work really hard or get distracted with media or food or work or sex or gambling or drugs or alcohol or whatever, right? So there's like so many ways that people distract themselves from their pain and their problems. For me, it was mainly just work and music. And so, so I didn't have a counselor. I didn't have anybody to talk to. And it was a difficult process. But somehow, just by the grace of God, I just kept reading and learning. And I was so determined to live that I was just willing to change everything about my life. So I had this really strong motivating factor, like, okay, I've got to change everything, not just what I'm eating, but I've got to change the way I'm thinking, I've got to change the way I'm acting and reacting. Like, my entire process that I'm using to navigate the world needs to change.
Yeah, you touch on so many things that I want to respond to. The number one, the loneliness of the loneliness of pursuing health and wholeness in an unconventional way, and how alienating that is, and how people don't understand it. Number one, creating an infrastructure and taking responsibility to build a support system around you of people that can support you and be with you. And you don't need 100, you don't need 50, like 3 or 4 will do, of just people that you know you matter and belong to. And this is whether you're fighting cancer or just trying to raise a family, just trying to live. But especially if you're facing, some kind of acute stress like that. But this goes back to the whole idea of insecurity is insecure attachment. Like, we often think insecurity is how we think about ourselves, but insecurity is really all about, do I feel safe with you, with another person? Do I need to become something else more than what I am in order to matter to you?
Yeah.
And we live in a world that is on this perpetual ladder of where we're a scarcity, and it unfolds. The lack of healthy attachment basically begins to build on itself all of these other things. A scarcity mindset. There's not enough. There never will be enough. How do I get enough? I got to go work harder. Or I'll never have it, so I need to numb that pain some way, somehow. So, I mean, the whole idea around the counseling is not the end all be all, right? It's a multitude of strategies, if you will, that help us heal and remain whole. The relational aspect of all of this process of becoming the fullest version of ourselves, or however you want to say it, the relational aspect of it cannot be over exaggerated. Like, it really is life and death. One of the things that we've talked about is the Surgeon General study that's come out recently called the epidemic of loneliness. And we used to jokingly say there was a loneliness pandemic before COVID, before I lived through a pandemic. But the loneliness pandemic has pre-existed any of what we've experienced more recently with COVID. And the studies, the empirical evidence, and the research that support, and you know all this, and your audience does too, but the empirical research that associates health with the quality of your social and relational connection, from diabetes to stroke to cancer. I mean, it's amazing, and it seems to be, it is statistically the thing that is dying the fastest within our culture.
Yeah, and there was another study. I mean, there's a bunch of studies
Right.
on this, but there was one that I just saw the headline, I think last week, about loneliness and cancer. But the gist of it is that loneliness and depression lead to poor outcomes for cancer patients, right? And so, which is not surprising, right? If you're lonely and you're depressed, you slowly, gradually lose your will to live, and you're much less likely to take care of yourself. And if you don't have a reason to live, if you feel like nobody cares about you, nobody, cares if you live or die, might as well die, those kind of thoughts. And, when I was, it's funny because, when I was in my sort of trying to shape my life phase, in the early phase of trying to survive cancer, I did realize that I was spending most of my time trying to impress others, right? With being an entrepreneur in real estate, right? Trying to be this young, successful, hotshot entrepreneur guy, and then playing music and getting on stage and trying to impress people that way. Like, it was everything I was doing was just trying to,
secure yourself.
Yeah, trying to build some kind of security where to prove myself to the world. And obviously, there's certainly fleeting moments where you do feel great about yourself. Like, you feel great on stage, but you're not on stage all day, every day, right? That's like, so that doesn't help. And then, being an entrepreneur is very difficult. So there's certainly times where someone, gives you a compliment or they're impressed by your accomplishments, but, the rest of the time it's just really hard.
Right, it's exhausting.
It's just really hard emotionally. So it's like, that wasn't doing it for me either. Right. So I'd love for you to talk about, family dynamics, because what I've experienced in my own life and in every cancer patient I've ever talked to, there are always family dynamics. There's always family issues, relationship issues, and that need to be resolved, right? They need to be resolved either through forgiveness or through reconciliation, or maybe both. And this is sort of one of the biggest things for me, and my audience hears me talk about it all the time, is just how powerful forgiveness is. And you can do everything right. You can do all the treatments and the therapies and the food and the supplements. You can do all that stuff. But if you're not willing to address what's going on in your heart and your mind, you may not get well, because stress can overwhelm your immune system. It can keep you sick. And so to me, the easy stuff is the physical stuff. Exercise, nutrition.
Well, it's more controllable.
Yeah.
You have more control over it.
It's easy. The hard thing, and a lot of people are willing to do that, right? They're willing to do the physical therapies, whether it's drugs or supplements or nutrition or exercise. They're willing to do the physical stuff, but they're, in my experience, much more reluctant to do the internal stuff, right? To do the mental, emotional, and spiritual work.
I can't relate to the family challenges and dynamic. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, I had no brothers and sisters. I had no brothers and sisters, so I didn't have any issues with siblings.
Right. Yeah. This is such a huge topic. I'm tempted to say one other thing about your previous comment about performing real quick.
Please do.
So because this ties in. Another expression that we use often is, I've got to get legitimate needs met in legitimate ways. Part of what I learned to do is get legitimate needs met in illegitimate ways. And what does that mean? Well, that can certainly mean, is it comforting to drink a fifth of bourbon? Probably for a little while. Is it comforting to eat a bag of M&Ms? Yeah, probably. Is it? Comfort is a legitimate need, as an example.
Yeah.
Acceptance, encouragement. Those are, motivational speakers. I grew up on motivational speakers being in straight commission sales. So Zig Ziglar was like, one of my pastors basically. And it's a temporary push or nudge. Not bad, nothing wrong with it, but it's not sustainable. It's not sufficient in and of itself. It doesn't replace the power of a connection or purpose. And so learning to meet legitimate relational needs in relational ways. So we often try to meet relational needs. It's like trying to fill your gas tank with water. It's like, well, it's not made to run on water. But I don't understand. It's full. It says it's full, right? But you didn't put what it's made to run off of. We are relational beings. And so Ben Holtberg, a social scientist, did a research project that we reference all the time on elite athletes. So he looked at D1, Division I level, and Olympic athletes, and the question they were trying to ask is, what is the difference between the athletes who had really solid well-being after their sport, like the ones that had good, healthy family lives, health, as opposed to addiction, loneliness, despair, suicidal thoughts, or suicide itself. And in the research, in that process, and I can share this with you, you're probably interested in it, but the two, what he described as self-narrative profiles emerged. So we all have our own self-narrative. We've talked about ours, like, I'm this, I'm that, I'm not this, I'm not that. I'm too fat, I'm too skinny, I'm too tall, I'm too short, I'm not articulate, I'm not smart, I'm not funny, I am funny. And we have these value judgments with each of those. So what he determined is that one self-narrative profile, and this is a continuum of the performance-based identity, and a purpose-based identity. The performance-based identity, a few characteristics that were consistent with that was a contingency self-worth. So I was like, I have worth if, fill in the blank. If I have enough money, if I have enough health, if I have whatever. Well, we know that self-worth or intrinsic value, there's dignity in all humanity, period. This baby has worth if they grow up to be, it's like nobody would ever say that, hopefully, about a kid. Like, you've got worth because you are made in the image and likeness of God, because you have value and dignity and purpose. Whereas the purpose-based identity was instead of competing to not fail, when we're in our purpose, we're contributing to see what's possible. So instead of everything being a test of my ability or my belonging, it's more of an expression. It's more of an iterative arc. Like, what can I do? This is part of what we love about the gym. It's like, I don't know. Let's see what I can do. Like, I didn't know I could do that. I didn't know that was possible. We surprise ourselves with stuff or enjoy celebrating those things. So this performance-based identity competes to not fail. The purpose-based identity contributes to see what's possible. One of the keys, so this is getting to your other question. You told me I could talk about whatever. So.
Yeah, I'm good.
All right.
I'm good with everything you said. It's great.
It's good. So,
and by the way, before you say the next thing, before you jump to the next thing, in some, I guess, performance circles, like playing music, there's something that I would say all the time think it. It's like you're only as good as your last show.
Yes, that's right.
Right.
Speakers, performers.
Yeah. Which and athletes might feel the same way.
Absolutely.
Like you're only as good as your last game, kind of thing.
Yep.
Which is, in one way, it motivates you to like give it your all.
Yes.
Right. Like play every show like it's your last because you're only as good as your last show. Like it's a good kind of a good sentiment. But there's sort of an underlying belief system there that like if you don't prove yourself every time that you're not your self-worth is not as.
It's the epitome of insecurity. Yeah, you are insecure, exactly. And so you are relying on what you're doing instead of who you're being.
Yeah.
So and so it's like, which is more stressful, which actually reduces your performance. So here's what they discovered with these athletes. One of the key characteristics of the athletes who are doing well after their sport were the ones who had secure relationships that were not contingent upon their performance. So the performance-based identities had lots of relationships: coaches, trainers, agents, sponsors, right? Schools,
groupies.
Yes.
Yep.
As long as they were doing their thing at an elite level, they had lots of connections. But and it wasn't that those people were just that's not saying that those people were just using them, but once they stopped doing their sport, then those relationships by proximity diminished, and they were based on a totally different level of attachment.
Yeah.
So when they were done, the isolation, loneliness, despair, depression, they had no way of how are they going to prove themselves, versus the purpose-based identity that had multiple connections outside of their sport. That didn't matter whether they performed or not. They didn't care what they did or how they did it. You know, it's like that's part of the fun about our little Iron Tribe group too. Is like we all are professionals in a bunch of different things, but that's not the most important thing about us.
Right.
Which is part of the beautiful part of what that provides for me.
Well, I can say a great example of that. One relationship in my life, and there are more than one, but. My wife, loved me and married me when I was broke, and wasn't really even playing music. I was kind of in between.
But still incredibly attractive.
I was handsome enough, right? Right, handsome enough for her and funny enough for her, and so
gracious Micah.
Once I became more successful, she was with me when I wasn't.
Right.
So she loved me for who I was, and not for what I could do.
Yeah, so and that is a secure attachment.
Yeah.
So now bring this back to families, okay? So part of why, and we all come, one of the first things that I had to learn to do was to tell the truth about my experience growing up in my family and not feel like I was betraying or dishonoring my mom and my dad. And that's a really, really high wall for a lot of us to climb over. For some of us. Others, you're like, nope, they were terrible.
Yeah.
It's easy. Yeah. So we all have a very, very different, but incredibly formational experience. But most of us, there's some level of dysfunction in all of our families. And the sooner we have the ability to just name that, and not feel like we're doing something horrifically wrong. As a parent, I can say with my 4 kids, I can look them in the eye and say, yes, we're dysfunctional. That is not offensive to me at all. I hope that we're more functional than dysfunctional, but there are definitely aspects of my dysfunction that impact my kids. And so being able to start to tell the truth, your truth, about what it was like to grow up in your family, the hurts, the pains, the joys, the celebrations, the sorrows, the losses, the wins, the confusions. Everybody's story is so fascinating. Every person I talk to and meet, I'm like, they could make a movie out of their story. And most of the time they go, it's not like I didn't have cancer, I didn't have 8 siblings, or I didn't, you compare it and judge it or minimize it. It's like your stories are profound and they're beautiful. Nobody's story is boring. So when you start to tell the truth about and the other thing is the good doesn't diminish the bad and the bad doesn't diminish the good. The joy and the sorrow actually complement one another. And so when you're able to start telling the truth about what that's like. Now, what happens if, so one question, I'll ask you this. Let's see how you respond to this.
Here we go.
Is it okay for you to hurt Micah?
No. It is not okay. I do everything, you know, in my imperfect power to not hurt my wife.
Right.
Yes.
So I never want to hurt Veronica. Do you ever hurt Micah?
Yes.
Right. So I tell people nobody's hurt my wife more than I have.
Feelings, only feelings.
Yes, that's right. We're not. That's right. We're talking about emotional hurt.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, the brain processes emotional hurt the same way as it processes physical hurt. So when they do brain scans, and if I were to cut your arm, it would flare up in the same part of the brain as if so the whole sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me.
Right.
That's a bunch of bunk. So here's the reality. Will the truth hurt? Does the truth ever hurt?
I think so.
Absolutely. Yeah. Biblically, it says, "Faithful are the wounds of a friend, beware of the flattering lips of your enemy."
Of your enemy.
That's right. So, so if I'm not willing to hurt, let's just make it between you and I. If I'm not willing to tell you something that's true in a loving way that might hurt you, well, then that premise automatically installs into our relationship a level of a boundary to how close we could get.
Right.
Because, well, I need to tell Chris, but I don't want to hurt his feelings. So we operate a lot of times, and this is partly from our family of origin, with this idea that to cause someone to have an emotion that we deem as negative is wrong. So I don't want to cause sadness in you. I don't want to cause loneliness in you. So that's why when we cry, what do? I'm sorry. Or we minimize. I don't want to bring up the loss of your loved one as if somehow they had forgotten until you told them. You're like I mean, I think they remember that they lost someone special to them. So you don't have to protect people from their emotions. So what happens in in our families, if we're operating on the premise that if something I say or do causes you to have an emotion that I deem as negative, if that's wrong, then I've built a barrier, which means I have to lie. Like it's a lie. But when I'm shading the truth, when I'm hedging the truth, now and again, this can all be done in love. It doesn't have to be done angrily. But what happens is, if we maintain that posture for years and years and years and years, and we never told Grandma that nobody liked her banana pudding that she brings to every holiday, and nobody eats it, and nobody wants to tell her because nobody wants to hurt her feelings because she's been making it for 20 years, and now she thinks we love it. Who's going to tell her now? Like, that's a silly example, but that's the type of stuff when you hear these stories and traditions and families. Like, so nobody told her, no, we could never do that. Yeah. She'd be devastated. It's like, so you're just going to lie to her? Okay. I mean, so you feel better, your integrity. So so we create, and that really is the core of dysfunction, because the system can't tolerate the truth.
And by the way, this is not a worldwide phenomenon, right? This is more Western culture. There are certainly cultures in different countries in the world where people speak very directly to each other,
right,
and tend to be more truthful with each other. Whereas in our culture, we tend to be put on a smile more often, but don't actually say what we're thinking, or express what's bothering us or what we don't like.
Right.
Right?
Yes, absolutely. So the idea of this gets into this whole territory of emotional intelligence, of am I aware of what I'm experiencing emotionally? Can I identify it? Do I know how to articulate it? And do I have the capacity to attune to someone else's emotion without making that about me and getting defensive? So the more mature you and I are relationally means the more you can tolerate the truth without getting defensive, without blaming somebody else or attacking somebody else. So there's the dynamics of this when they play themselves out are really powerful and can be very devastating. So when we operate for years under that premise that we can't tell the truth because we don't want to cause anybody to have a negative emotion, then that pressure behind that dam builds and builds and builds. So then you hear the stories of, why at the holidays, why are the holidays so tough for a lot of people? It's because all that tension has been bottling up and building up, people not telling the truth. So everybody's having to, then this is what happens is you have to start managing each other. So now I'm more aware of what you might be feeling than I am about where I am. and just showing up with you. And that's why you'll hear people use the expression like, oh, they're just so easy. It's like, what does that mean? Like for somebody to be easy to be with? Well, it means you're not managing them. And I do a lot of leadership, executive coaching, because I think bringing this emotional health into the well-being of the leader has a very multiplicative effect across their organization. And so one of the things we tell leaders all the time is the workload is not what's killing you. It's not because there's so much work to do. It's because you're trying to control so many people, what they think about you, what they don't think about you. So nothing is, and part of the
mention micromanaging everything they're doing.
Yes,
yeah,
yes, and how that affects you. So it is, and I have. This is an unofficial, not necessarily representing the views of Cardia statement, but I really feel like so much of what we do in our counseling center and with the coaching that we provide is helping people navigate the boundaries that they failed to establish within their own families of origin, and how that has had have a ripple effect on all other relationships.
Yeah.
So going back and doing, that family of origin work, telling the first and foremost, just honoring your story and telling the truth about it. I mean, there's so many things. I mean, it's so hard. You can't really do that on your own because we get stuck in our own loops, right? We get stuck in our own cycles of thinking of how we remember things and how we've justified them and rationalized them or made excuses for other people for the harm they've caused us. Well, they didn't know any better, or their upbringing was blah, blah, blah. And so,
well, and there's a big difference between talking to a friend or a
right.
family member about your problems than talking to a trained counselor who really is independent, right, and objective. Mm-hmm. And they can help you sort of, if they're good, they can help you be honest with yourself. They can help give you the language tools to use to communicate with people that you have to resolve conflict with, right? Sometimes we just don't know how to approach, like, I've got an issue with this person, I don't know how to approach it, I don't know what to say. And so, like, I think there's a huge value in counseling just to equip you with the right language to use, whether it's with your siblings or your parents or your kids or coworkers or whoever, like friends, people in your life that you're trying to resolve, unresolved conflict. And like, this is a major contributor to stress, and the more dysfunctional relationships you have, the more unresolved conflict from your past or in your present that you have, like the greater the weight of stress on you. And what I've found is as I and other people that I've coached and counseled and people in our community, as they start to work these things out, they really, that weight is lifted off them as they just one by one start either forgiving or making amends or resolving conflict or just like saying the things that are bottled up, that they just need to be said, that they've just like held in for so long.
The one word I'd add to that list that you just expressing it and forgiving it, another one is surrendering and accepting.
That's good.
Because, and that's the challenge of fear. Right, so a lot of what prevents me from bringing the truth to somebody I care about is the fear of hurting their feelings. Now, the gift of fear,
or messing up the relationship.
Yeah, exactly. It's taking a huge risk.
Yeah.
Can the relationship tolerate this?
Yeah.
And I think, man, going back to families, it's a telltale sign, a great barometer for you. If you're imagining having a conversation with people that raised you, and you imagine telling them the truth that they won't be able to tolerate it, or that it's not worth the risk, or that it will dissolve the relationship, that's a telltale sign that that relationship may not have been as secure of an attachment as you thought, which means that probably needs something you need to work around to be able to pursue with grace and wisdom, because what you want are relationships that can tolerate the truth.
Yeah.
The truth. Now, and again, it's even hard for us to conceptualize it, because I think when we use the word, even the word confrontation, what comes to mind?
Yeah, fight,
yeah,
conflict.
Right,
yeah.
Right. And the word confront is literally to face, to stand against. So it's more of like you and me, heart to heart, eyeball to eyeball, looking at what's true. Another word I love is contend, The Latin for contend is to reach together for the truth. So it's two people. So to contend with God is like reaching toward God together to find what's true. So confrontations, we're so bad at it, but it doesn't have to be hostile. It doesn't have to be violent. It's just being able to, can we contend for the truth together?
And it has an implication that there's a winner and a loser.
Yes.
Think about contenders in a boxing match.
Yes, that's right.
It shouldn't have, in that context, sure. But.
Well, and contending is really not to win. Competing is to win. When you contend, it's not. That's a really great observation. It's like, no, relationship is not at stake. We're good, and we got to figure this out.
Right.
Can we do that together? So yeah, let's do that together. But if you can't do that in relationship, and you have to pretend that it didn't bother you, so you minimize it, you manage it, and then ultimately you medicate it.
Yeah.
I downplay it. It's not that big a deal. No big deal. Nothing. That didn't hurt. And then you kind of manage around it. Well, then I start to avoid conversations or avoid particular people, and then if that doesn't work, then the result is I've got to numb it somehow. I've got to use something to make that not feel as inflammatory. And as you know, that's exactly what happens to our systems. Loneliness is the equivalent of smoking 15 packs of cigarettes, 15 cigarettes a day, not packs, 15 cigarettes a day. Like, it has the same inflammatory effect.
Yeah, shortening your lifespan.
Yes.
That's really that's really good. I want to hammer that point. Minimize, manage, and then medicate, right?
Yep.
I'm guilty of it.
Yep.
I mean, everyone is. And just being aware that that's the process, right? That's what that's how we naturally respond to conflict and things we don't like, and people, relationships that are not balanced or healthy, is really important, because we medicate in so many different ways. And I talked about this earlier, but self-medication is leading you down the path of disease, right? That's why this is so important to me. It's like, pretty much every way that people self-medicate their pain is leading them down a path of disease.
And it's isolating,
and can be isolating,
which is all part and parcel.
Again, overeating, right? Binge watching, isolation,
excessive work.
Yeah, being a workaholic, being a shopaholic. Again, like the gambling, the sex addiction, pornography, drugs, alcohol. Those are all ways that people medicate to forget about their problems or to numb their pain. And so, that's why most weight loss programs don't work, because you can put anybody on a crash diet, and a lot of people will sign up for a crash diet and do it for a short time and lose some weight. But ultimately, what they've done is, through force of will, they've changed what they eat, right? For a short time, they've sort of given up their medication, but they still have their pain.
The underlying issue,
right? They still have their pain.
Yep.
So they're either going to gravitate to a new form of medication that's probably just as unhealthy, or they're going to end up going back to the old medication. And for weight loss, for a lot of people, they just go back to overeating, right? To eating the wrong kind of food, high calorie dense food that promotes weight gain and obesity, which promotes cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and other chronic diseases. So it's like, you can see there's a very linear, a demonstrable pattern of behavior. And so the whole point I'm trying to make here is, like, you have to identify the cause of your pain, right? You have to treat the root cause of your pain, your stress, your anxiety, your worry, right? Your unhappiness, your depression. Like, you got to get to that, because all the other medications, it's going to be hard to break those bad habits, right? Right? If you're still in pain.
Oh, impossible. Yeah. And that's the seedbed of addiction.
What's funny is there's a fairly significant contingent of like ultra athletes, marathon runners, like triathletes that came out of alcoholism or drug addiction, right? So they replaced that addictive behavior with like this obsessive health training, competition, which is much better, right? But it's still can be a very addictive process where people are running 2 and 3 hours a day, and that is their medication. And to me, it's like, okay, now you're borderline unhealthy. You're kind of gonna wear yourself out. Earlier, you're gonna shorten your lifespan by overtraining and breaking your body down. So it's like, those people still have, I think, a lot of root cause pain issues and problems in their life that that need to be addressed, even though they're pursuing sort of a healthy, you know, or they're engaged in a healthy pursuit.
Right, right. On the outside, it looks healthy, and so the other, and this is, I think, much less obvious than some of the addictions, you know, dependencies. And this still ties back in, because we can talk about this idea of boundaries around a family, because this is all connected. Hopefully, it's obvious. But I can also be overly attached to people. And the word, you know, the clinical term, many of y'all have heard this, you know, the idea of codependency. And codependency, this over-attachment to other people and how much that drives my behavior. So here's the idea. I need you to be okay with me in order for me to be okay with me. So one of the ways that we exhaust ourselves or keep ourselves in unhealthy, and what's so amazing to me about your story, and I just think this is part of your trait profile too, is even when you did this and fought cancer, it wasn't, I don't think there was as much support and awareness around the path you were taking to heal your cancer. I mean, you were trailblazing. I mean, you were doing this without alone. And so, but there was something about you, and if this isn't you, and if you're not like Chris, don't shame yourself about that. Like, it's okay to need support and need help, and but the fact that you were okay, like you made peace with the fact that other people were not going to understand.
Yeah,
and you owned your choices.
Yeah. That's right.
Like you said, these are my decisions. No one's making me do this. I'm choosing to do this. Other people are going to have feelings and reactions about it. They're going to come at me about it, tell me why I'm wrong, you know, tell me why I'm going to die, whatever. And you said, this is my choice. This is my path. Well, that is an exercise of differentiation. Like, I differentiate myself and I take responsibility for what's mine to carry. No one else can make this decision for me. This is my responsibility, my choice. So to be differentiated as opposed to being codependent says, I'm aware that the actions I take are going to cause other people to have feelings and emotions. I'm aware of them, but I'm not controlled by them. So part of what we're experiencing in our families of origin specifically is being controlled by the fact that people and so put this in perspective. Why is this so hard? Why is it specifically so hard with family? Because that represents life and death. Those were your primary caregivers that you were dependent on from birth to make certain that you made it into your future years of life. So to lose that, you know, from a totally Olympic level at the core of your brain and heart, it's like, I can't lose that. I can't lose that at all. So we will tolerate the intolerable. We will suffer the insufferable to maintain that connection, even, and say yes to things that we really want to say no to.
Yeah, this is so good.
Yeah.
One of the cool things about counseling, when talking to someone who obviously understands this stuff at a much deeper level than me, I mean, it's just cool to hear you understanding and explain to me how I was, because you were right on the money. Like, I never thought about, and I didn't understand the concept of differentiation, right? But I did have that epiphany where I had this resistance. People around me said I was wrong. Like, you know, you can't go down that path. And I just like, I had to just sort of take a big gulp and be like, okay, if I go this way, I'm going to have to go alone. Because no one understands, right, why I'm doing this. And I just have to be okay with being alone and misunderstood and risk being called a fool and stubborn and stupid and, right, all the things. I do feel like I had a little bit of an advantage than maybe some other people in that I'm an only child. So I was used to being alone, right? I was used to just kind of making my own way in the world, and my parents were not, they never browbeat me into doing anything, you know. It's like, they always sort of gave me autonomy and let me choose my path.
Man, that's really interesting.
Even as a kid. So that, I think that really did prepare me for that moment, that spirit of independence. And
man, that is a really fascinating consideration. That you being an only child, your parents raising you in that manner that prepared you in some ways for that moment.
Yeah, yeah. It's, I mean, I'd say it's a God thing for sure.
Absolutely.
But wait, there's something else that you said that I wanted to. Well, I want to get into you know how. And by the way, you can work with Cardia if you want to remotely. I mean, they've got a big team of counselors here. So if you want to talk to somebody, you can do Zoom calls and like talk through your life and get some input and some guidance and some feedback and some tools to equip you to navigate difficult relationships. I mean, we're just scratching the surface here. But something you said that reminded me of the difference between codependence, the attitude of codependence, and this differentiation was, there was a conversation that happened in our private support group where basically a woman had posted a question, what do I do when, you know, what do I do when I'm invited to go eat out with my friends? And my answer is always, well, just eat before you go or bring your food with you. No big deal, right? You just got to plan ahead. Eat before you go, you won't be hungry. Have a good time with your friends or family, or bring your food with you and just be like, I'm on this weird diet, I'm on a special diet, I'm on a cancer diet, so I brought my own giant salad, right?
Right.
Yeah. But another woman commented in the thread and said, you know, don't bring your own food, that makes people uncomfortable. Right?
Yes.
And this is exactly, and I had to respond to her and say, the way that people, you know, I'm paraphrasing my own response because I don't remember exactly what I wrote, but it was something to the effect of, you shouldn't be concerned at all with what people think about how you're eating.
About how you're saving your life, right?
Yeah.
How you're fighting for your own life.
Exactly.
Yes.
Like that should not concern you one bit. You know, you should not be concerned about making people uncomfortable for you choosing to eat at home or bringing what you want to eat with you.
Yeah, and that, I mean, gosh.
But that's a codependent, right?
Absolutely, and it's such a legitimate human feeling, and this goes all the way back. And again, this is in the Surgeon General report too, which was just really affirming of the number one central human need is to belong. More than food, clothing, and shelter, I just want to know that I belong. Chip Dodd, a mentor of mine, we use a lot of his resources, and I mean, there's so many people that have been such a resource to me. But he would say, all of us are like fifth graders in a treehouse going like, will you be my friend? Like, I just
be in your club.
I just want to, just please let me be in your club.
Yeah.
And so to bring your own food is like, you can't fit in this club. Like, what are you doing? And my sister Stacy, so I've, you know, a little more backstory. My mom had breast cancer twice, once when I was born and then 20 years after it reoccurred, and we lost her about 25 years ago in November, so coming up on the 25th anniversary of that loss. My brother Sean had abdominal cancer, lost him, and then my sister Stacy had stage 4 ovarian cancer. I can't ever talk to Stacy without her bringing your name up. She is actually next door in our office leading a Healing Strong group, Memphis community. I know, it's so cool. I didn't plan that, but I was like, no way this is happening at the same time.
Right now?
Right, yeah. She was just
have to pop in if they're still going.
So anyway, she was like, wait, Chris is coming here? I was like, yeah, Superstar's coming here. So, but anyway, I mean, like, so I have seen firsthand, specifically with her, because she has been tenacious and she is very focused of doing this well. And so it has. I've seen the strain and struggle with people closest to you that just don't understand the level of vigilance that it takes. So I want to add one more part to that conversation about food that came up in your support group.
Yeah.
Here's something else you can do that we don't often think about. Tell your friends how uncomfortable you feel and how afraid you are that they're going to reject you. And what you're asking for is acceptance. Do you accept that this is the path I'm taking? And can you be with me on it? Because when you're in this fight, and I would argue that all of us are in this fight.
Yeah.
I think you would too.
For sure. And yeah, in multiple ways.
Yes. And some of us are more acutely aware of it. It's clear and present. But what we're really asking, when you're in this fight, you don't have the excess energy to manage everybody else's emotions. So like I don't have the space to have to try to caretake everybody else to make sure everybody else is okay. I need to know, it doesn't mean I forget everyone else and everybody should focus on me. It just means that, do you accept me and can you be with me on this journey? Because if you can't, then that's going to change the dynamic of our relationship. Because I don't have the space for the stress. You don't have to say all that. I'm not giving you, this isn't prescriptive, but it's like, you got the freedom to ask, do you accept me?
Yeah.
Can you be with me? I need you with me. I want to be able to go to eat, and I want to be able to do this and care for myself well, but I can't do it, and also you'd be worried about
and the
whether
truth
you're going to
is,
reject me.
Nobody cares.
Most people don't.
They don't.
There are,
They really
there are
don't.
going to be people out there that are less understanding and more judgmental. But here's the thing about
I just want to alleviate that fear, because in my experience of 20 years, it's like,
People get
you
it.
eat before you come, and especially when you have the cancer card to play, right? It's right. Like I'm on a
very strict diet.
I'm on a really strict, and it's good to sort of be vulnerable and just put it out in the open, so there's no mystery. So people are like, why didn't somebody so eat anything?
Right.
What's wrong with him or her?
Right.
It's like, why do they bring their own food? What's going on? Like, it's better to just be like, hey everybody, like I'm on this really strict anti-cancer diet, and so I ate before I came, but I wanted to be here with you, and so anyway, here I am, but I'm full, so I'm not going to order anything. Or like, hey, at the family function at Easter, Thanksgiving, or Christmas, you bring your big salad and your juices and your whatever, your smoothie. And again, like, hey, if anybody doesn't know, I'm on this really strict anti-cancer diet, and this is what I did. Like, this is what I did when the first couple family get-togethers. I brought my stuff, and everybody was like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, whatever. Nobody cared. Nobody cared at all. But the conversation that you're talking about, which this is prescriptive advice that I give often, is when you have that conflict, and it's usually more around a family member or a loved one, caregiver, that doesn't understand what you're doing, doesn't agree with it, doesn't like it, is uncomfortable with it, right? And it's not just because you didn't eat dinner, right? It's like they heard you're doing some alternative therapies, or you're not doing chemo, or you're taking control and responsibility for your life and your treatment path, and it's not the normal path. And if they're constantly berating you and nagging you and putting pressure on you, then you have to have that sit-down conversation and say, hey, look, I love you, and I know you love me, and you want me to live and survive, but I need you to just trust that I'm doing everything in my power to take care of myself, right? That I want to live, and that I'm not making a foolish choice. I don't have my head in the sand. Like, I'm doing everything in my power to help myself live and survive. And so I'm asking you to respect that, and I want to spend time with you. I want to be around you. But if you're constantly going to, sort of berate me or bring this stress, then I probably am gonna have to avoid you, and I don't want to. So
yeah, it's gonna change the dynamic of how we relate for at least for a while,
right?
It's not a and you kind of determine how thick you need to draw that line.
Yes.
Is this maybe we just don't go to dinner together, or maybe we just talk on the phone, or maybe we just don't talk at all. Like those are all options, and that's really that whole boundary conversation. And one thing that everything we're talking about doing. That cause people to take these big gulps. Like, in a lot of ways, they're very simple conversations, right? Like, these are not complex conversations, and yet they're really scary.
They're scary.
Very scary.
Well, let me just tell you that. So one of the most difficult conversations I had was in the early days. I had basically converted to a raw food diet. I was juicing every morning. I was eating giant salads for lunch and dinner. Like, I was obsessively changing my life, right? I started taking all these supplements and herbs. I mean, it was just, all of a sudden my focus was like, survival was my #1 priority, right? Health, healing, survival. And I was changing rapidly. And I was also at the same time, trying to evangelize, right? To my wife. I was trying to get her on board.
Right.
And so as I'm reading and learning, I became what I now refer to as the just add water instant expert. Right. You know what I mean? And there's a lot of them online now. Like, there was no social media back then, but now, like, everybody, they read one book or one article and they're an expert,
right.
At least they think they are. So, But anyway, so I was doing that to my wife and trying to talk her into, you know, juicing and raw food and, you know, just all the stuff that I was reading and learning and was excited about. And at one point she, you know, her frustration, she didn't say anything, she wasn't, you know, like pushing back. But eventually there was a breaking point, you know, with her frustration level with me, and she said, "I don't like the person you're becoming."
Wow.
And that was really hard to hear. Mm-hmm. It was really hard. And it was like, I mean, yeah, it was like just like a punch in the gut, you know, because I was so passionate and like obsessive and like trying so hard to change my life and wanting her to be on the journey with me. And she just wasn't, you know, she wasn't there. And I understand, and I don't fault her for it, right? But she didn't understand what I was doing. She, you know, she just was having a hard time.
Yeah, not in the same mindset or headspace that you were in, right?
Yeah, watching me change all overnight.
Right.
I mean, literally,
right.
It was overnight. And I had to, you know, my response to that was something like, I'm trying to live. I'm trying to save my own life, you know? Like, please understand. And I'm sure I wasn't very articulate about it, and it's not like we were like, oh, we're all good now.
Right.
You know, we weren't. There was definitely tension for a brief time in the beginning, but I learned quickly, like, I got to back off, right? I got to take care of myself, stop trying to evangelize. And this is the advice I give to everybody on a holistic path. It's like, don't try to evangelize. You take care of yourself, and once you're well, there's a season, right, where there will be opportunities for you to help others, but don't try to help somebody else not drown while you're trying to not drown.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Like, you're not strong enough or skilled enough to save other people yet. And so that was my first lesson, and you know, in I guess that sort of dynamic of, you know, radical life change and seasons of you know, opportunity. And so anyway, so things got better relatively quickly in our relationship once I just kind of kept quiet about what I was learning, but I just was making my food, eating my food, making my juices, right?
Well,
doing my stuff, but just not trying to drag her along. And but guess what? She came around.
Well, and here's what's so AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, has an expression that I adopt. Then they say this of themselves. They want to be attractional, not promotional.
Sure.
And what you describe, and I'm an activistic spirit. Like, if I've experienced something and I believe in it, I want everybody to experience it. And that happens in every arena, and even in the addiction recovery and just recovery journey path for a lot of people. A lot of folks get really animated, and for good reason, but they want everyone to, and part of that is our desire to not be alone. It's like, I want to gather my people that believe what I believe and think what I think, so I feel less alone. So it's a very natural kind of experience. But yeah, it's like we tell people in the counseling path, you will know that changes are happening from the inside out when other people start to say, hey, I noticed, or they start affirming, and that is a good sign that there's some growth that is happening. Yeah, and
that's your opportunity. Right?
Yeah, and that's like my experience with you and people in our kind of fitness and health community. It's like sharing the information, putting stuff before people, letting people ease into it, be attracted to it, try it, experience it, be drawn to it, versus the times where I've tried to ramrod things because I want people to, and we are all on our own journey. We're all in our own space and season and time. So I do kind of want to talk around a little bit, if it's okay, that whole, so kind of going back to the whole boundaries conversation, if that's appropriate.
Well, yeah, because I'd love for us to talk about boundaries, and if we could touch on, you know, how to identify unhealthy relationships, right? And sort of distancing yourself, or strategies to distance yourself or protect yourself. If you're in a healing journey, obviously a lot of people in my audience are, you know, on this healing journey, and so identifying those relationships that are not helping, that are producing too much stress, what we call energy vampires.
Yes.
You know, people in your life that you may need to get away from. So all that and can we kind of weave all that together?
Yeah, absolutely. Because one of the things that reveal the health of the attachment is, can you honor my boundaries? So like if I say, hey, I'm going to be eating this way and this is the path I've chosen, and you have it's okay if you have emotions about it, but if there's a resistance to it or a pushback to it, that's a sign that the relationship, and that's a bigger one, and that can come in a lot of smaller ways. But when I feel like I'm being controlled, and so, boundaries, just to kind of give those conceptualize those a little bit, because that term gets thrown around and it certainly gets misapplied like everything else. But a boundary is designed to let good things in and keep good things out. So physical boundaries, as an example, let's say health boundaries, sleep. Well, I need to have some boundaries around sleep so that I can optimize it. Well, what do those look like? Well, don't eat past 8 o'clock. Wear your blue light glasses. Take your magnesium. Whatever our protocols are. Keep your room cool and dark. Like, those are all examples of boundaries, because what are they doing? They're helping let the good in and keep the bad out so that I can get the type of recovery that I need. Well, same thing is true relationally. When I find myself under the influence of someone else's control, that is because in part I've allowed it, right? So my responsibility is I have allowed them to influence me in a way that I'm saying yes to things that I want to say no to. So that can take the shape of 1,000 different things, but as simple as going to family functions or participating in events where that it's not going to be encouraging, it's not going to be supportive. The way we allow people to talk to us when things hurt, or when we've told people it hurts when you do that and they still persist. So the being able to identify, and a lot of times what I encourage people to do first is, two things. One, check the story that you're making up in your head and make sure it's true. Because going back to that whole operating premise, don't say or do anything that causes somebody else to have a feeling. So now what am I left with? I got to read your mind, and I got to try to interpret your exterior body language expression. What did you really mean? What did you really say? Instead of saying, hey, when you said this, I heard this. Is that what you meant? No, of course not. That's not at all what I was saying. So we don't check our stories. So we carry stories. I'll speak for myself. I carry stories in my head all the time, and I've got to be good at checking reality with the people that I'm in relationship with. So one thing you want to make certain of is what you're thinking real,
and not jumping to conclusions.
Yes, and
right?
then acting on those conclusions and navigating around them. I mean, I'm in so many coaching scenarios where people describe a situation, and then you propose 2 or 3 action steps, and they tell you how the other people are going to respond before you ever take the action. It's like, how could you possibly be able to predict that future and leave no room for the possibility? Because we have great catastrophic imaginations.
Right,
like,
right.
I'm really good at catastrophizing the future.
Yeah.
I don't tend to say, I bet this other alternative where everything works out well and they hear me and they are grateful for the response, maybe that's a possibility too. It's like, no, that'll never happen. Mm-hmm. And we're hardwired as creatures to anticipate the worst possible outcome. Maybe it's part of our survival mechanism. So check your story. And the other part I would tell you to do is define your values. So in the health journey, and these are really good examples, I think, of like, what do I value? Well, I value good health and longevity and quality of life and cognitive function and being inhabitable to disease. Like, well, if these are all things that I've determined are values, well, that's where I have to draw the boundaries. That's where I build my fences. That's where I set up these, where I may put some really, so if I'm an alcoholic and I struggle with alcoholism, then a hard boundary will be, I'm not going to be around drinking, or I'm not going to have it in the house, or I'm not going to even drive by a bar.
Yep.
Those are very physical, important boundaries, and so you may not go to certain functions with certain people. If you're in
even just the casual drinking.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, even if you're an alcoholic,
right,
but you're trying to stay on the healthy path,
yes,
and you have like drinking buddies.
Yes.
And if you can't go hang out with your drinking buddies and not drink, or they're putting too much pressure on you to drink, even if it's just a few drinks, I mean, that's counterproductive if you're trying to heal cancer, right? And so figuring that out Like, man's got to know his own limitations, to quote Dirty Harry.
and hoping that you can tell those friends, like, hey, I really want to be with you all. Can this be an alcohol-free night? And if they're like, oh man, it's like, I need people in my corner that will accept me.
Yeah.
And you don't have to force them to change. Again, you can't strong arm that. So this idea of setting boundaries, here's the thing. People will have an emotional response to it. And it's not selfish. It's not wrong. It's not self-centered. It's not egotistical. It's like, these are my values. And values and virtues are things we pursue that may never fully be realized, but they're worth aiming toward. Like they orient us to keep us. And that one of our expressions is, it's a path, not a pill. We all want a pill. Like, give me the pill that makes it all go away, that makes it easy. The reality is, it's a path, and that path is boundaried by things that keep us on the road, that move us towards the things we want. So
and the path takes time.
Oh, it's a lifetime.
Yeah.
Chip Dye would always say it takes a lifetime to learn how to live. Like, we will never stop learning how to live, hopefully, because that keeps us curious, that keeps us open-hearted, that keeps us intimate with people and God and others, ourselves. So the idea of boundaries is incredibly scary, because another way of kind of determining boundaries is like, Jordan Peterson uses this expression. I love it. He said, you will learn who are your real friends when you can tell them something bad about yourself and they don't leave, and you can celebrate something great about yourself and they celebrate with you and they don't envy you. And so, like, when people can move towards you and honor the limits that you're setting on yourself, and these are fences, not great walls of China. Like, these are things that are negotiable and can change over time, that you adjust them, but they have to be set in community, because sometimes I may think, oh, this is okay now, and I may open that gate or tear down that fence prematurely.
Yeah.
And so having people on the journey with you that can say, hey, I don't think that's healthy for you to go back in that environment, or that's being a support mechanism for that, to stay sober-minded.
Well, and to that point, I think you really need to figure out, you need to be specific about what your boundaries are, like what your needs are and what you're about to do. Mm-hmm. So like in the cancer example, it's like, if you're converting to a raw food diet, if you decide, I'm going to go to bed at 9 o'clock every night or 8:30 every night, I'm going to exercise every day at 4 p.m. Like, you need to write down these things that you've decided to do, and then tell the people around you, hey, this is what I've decided to do to help myself. I just want, so there's no misunderstandings, there's no miscommunication, and those are your boundaries now. This is sort of the new way that you're living your life, and people around you, they don't have to like it, right? They don't have to agree with it or accept it, but hopefully, if they love you, they will allow you to do that, and they'll respect you and support you. I mean, the most difficult scenarios that I see are the cancer patient that doesn't have spousal support. And not just that, because again, I had difficulty with my wife in the beginning, right? Because she didn't understand what I was doing. But I think there's sort of three scenarios. One is you have the fully supportive spouse. They're on board, they're gung-ho, let's do this. Like, I'm gonna eat what you're eating, I'm gonna take the supplements you're taking, I'm gonna help you make your juice, right? Like, that's awesome. Then you have the middle of the road person who is, they're not helping, but they're not working against you, right? And, they're letting you do your thing, and they're supportive in that way, right? But the worst case scenario is the spouse that's constantly, like, backbiting, right? That they're constantly just like criticizing what you're doing, and negative, and causing friction. And so that frictionless support is a term that is so important on the healing journey, is having people around you, and not just for cancer, right? But having people around you that support you without friction. So I guess that leads me to this next sort of idea, is like, what are the character traits, or how do you identify people in your life that really are toxic people? Like, what are those behavior patterns that, you know, unhealthy, that define unhealthy relationships?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think, you know, shame is toxic shame is another big component, I think, in relationships. So shame, the gift of shame is what opens the door to humility, which is what says where I can embrace and accept my limitations. When I am in a relationship that may be more toxic, I tend to feel bad about myself, or more toxic shame, as if who I am is not enough. Or if there had, like, in our relationships, do we have to be in agreement in order to have attachment? Or can we disagree and still be connected relationally? Or is that contingent upon being in total agreement? So when I'm feeling this pressure, and again, you've got to discern, is this in my head or is this reality? But when I'm feeling this pressure that I have got to become more than I am, and that in order to matter or belong to this person, then that is going to be exhausting and untenable. It's not sustainable. And so the amount of energy and the wheel spinning, I mean, that would be kind of at, you know, at first blush, like what I would say is pay attention to the toxic shame and how hard I feel like I have to work. I have to dress a certain way, I have to look a certain way, I have to sound a certain way, I have to believe a certain thing, that there's not room for just open discourse and dialogue and struggle and success and failure. Do I find myself hiding parts of myself? And here's the thing, like, I'm describing in some ways an ideal of, like, where you know, I have this ideal of a relationship, but it is, you don't, like I said at the beginning, you don't need 100 of them, and it will be rare, but when you find them, treasure them. You know, 99.9% of the world does not care what happens to you or I. Right. It's our job to find the 0.01% that do. And this kind of goes back into that victim mindset, like, oh, nobody likes me, nobody reaches out to me. It's like, I've got to find them. They're out there. The people are there. We've got to go position ourselves to find. And that's why the community you're building is so valuable, and why people are so blessed by it is you're drawn to that, where you can be seen and be known. So, and be understood. And be understood. And same with Healing encouraged, Strong. Right. The Healing Strong community is all about that. It's helping people connect with others that are like-minded, that are on a similar journey or further down the path, that love on you and encourage you and support you and pray for you and give you resources and practical tips. Like, I love Healing Strong so much, and for that reason, it's so cool that your sister is running a group in Memphis. That didn't exist in Memphis until she discovered it, I think, through Square One. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, it's a really encouraging, and we get to host it at Cardia's office, which is fun. Yeah. And I think one more piece that ties into this boundaries and this conversation, even around really all of it. So one of my favorite words in the English language is passion. And the root word of passion in the Latin is suffering. You know, so when we say the passion of the Christ, like, passion of Christ is His suffering. And one of the best definitions I've heard of passion is the willingness to be in pain for something that matters more than pain. Yeah. And so everything we're describing, and you know, we call it, or counselors will call it, the dual choice dilemma. I can go down this path or I can go down this path. In any case, either case, there's pain. We often try to find a third way where there is no pain, where there's not suffering, and those don't exist, because there's always loss. You know, if I eat this way, I'm losing these things. If I'm giving up these things. If I sleep like I'm supposed to and eat like I'm supposed to, I feel like I'm losing all of this other stuff and freedom. Yeah. And so the discipline and the commitment and all that it takes, it's like, I have to be, and we say passion is the gift of anger, because when I'm really angry for something, anger and rage are not the same thing. Anger is, I have a vision and I have a voice, and I always have a choice. Like, I am an empowered, capable, I have agency. And so I get the freedom to choose, but I've got to be angry enough or passionate enough to go through the pain, because what I'm pursuing, the value, is worth it.
Yeah.
And so
it's like purpose-driven pain.
Exactly.
Right?
Because I don't know a way, and I haven't met anybody that's done anything with passion that didn't cost them something.
Yeah.
You know, we'll say a dream is a picture of the future that involves work and risk. A fantasy is a picture of the future that doesn't. It's like we've got this fantasy. You know, you're like, that's a great fantasy. It's okay to have a fantasy as long as you know the difference. Like, I have a fantasy about sitting on a beach and sitting there with no troubles and no worries. Like, that's a great fantasy. Those are nice. And so, what's the dream? And so that's where I tie all this back into when we're pursuing a life and lifestyle that is whole and healthy and full. We're not escaping the struggle of living, but we are in pursuit of something that we've determined matters more to us than the suffering, and it makes the suffering worth it, right? Yeah. It's enduring it makes that worthwhile. So
it's good. Well, Shad Berry, this was a fun conversation.
So fun. Can we do it again?
So fun. Yeah, we could talk all day. And I don't know how long we've talked. I have no idea if it's been an hour or an hour and a half or 2 hours. I have no idea. We'll find out when we start rolling. But I want to make sure people know how to connect with you. And folks, look, let me just say this. Like, by this point, I think you probably understand like how valuable it is to have someone to talk through your fears, your worries, your anxieties, to talk through your past, to talk through your relationships, to give you the tools, mental tools and verbal tools that you can use to like resolve conflict in your life. Like, I wish I had known how to better talk to my wife in the early days of my cancer journey. Because again, we had this conflict. I didn't know how to express myself to her and didn't know how to ask her what she was feeling. And it was just very dysfunctional and hard. It worked itself out over time, praise the Lord. But like, it would have been so much easier if I had been equipped. And so that's why I've interviewed Shad. That's why I wanted you to get to know him and get to know Cardia. And so this is an option and a resource for you. And there's certainly lots of counselors all over the world, right? But this is one group that you could easily work with if you want to. It's just so important that you have somebody to talk to that can help you, listen to you, right? Just hear you and listen to you, but also I think the best counselors aren't just, you're not just paying them to listen to you, right? They're actually dialoguing with you and helping you think through things clearly and helping you be honest with yourself.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
And really take a stock of your situation, and then give you the tools to navigate it. So, it's been really fun.
Good, it's been fun.
Yeah, it's been awesome.
Thank you for the opportunity. You're
a deep well, man. We barely even got into it, but I just love everything that you shared.
Yeah. Thank you for the resource that you've been to me and to my family.
My pleasure.
Thanks, brother.
Love you, bro.
Love you too.
Okay, everybody. Well, thanks for watching. Please share this with people you care about. I'll put links below the video if you want to connect with Shad Berry or Cardia Counseling. They're easy to find, and so we'll put those resources below. Thanks for watching. See you on the next one.